Welcome to my fifth video looking at some of the detail modifications I've made to my rolling stock and locomotives. Picking up from the last one, I'm just going to cover here the tarpaulins that I've overlaid on the 5-plank wagons and the 8-plank wagons, as you see here. So as you can see, I've done the weathering on the chassis and the usual things, picking out the brake handle and the buffer shanks with the silver. These tarpaulins are readily available from model outlets. They obviously come in sheet forms. You either cut them out or they're already separated in a packet. And the trick here is to actually screw them up and crumple them up as if you were throwing them into a waste bin, and then flatten them all out again and place over the wagon. That gives it its sort of you know, a good realistic look as they're going round on in a train formation. I mean, this one here is an old Triang. Is it R10, R12, the open wagon? Very mundane. Repainted it, retransferred it, and it has the tarpaulin over it. And yeah, I think it looks the part. It can go into any of the match up with anything that's on the railway or that's produced by the manufacturers now. That was just 3 containers wagon where I just ground down the lugs that held the containers in place, repainted it, and retransferred it. So tend to use that as like a barrier sort of wagon. So I'll just go over the top so you can see the actual tarpaulins and the printing on it. These things are easily overlooked, but if you cast back looking at photographs of trains from back in the 50s and 60s, you endlessly saw these sorts of wagons with the tarpaulins on. They even had them over the top of vans if the roof was leaking. But anyway, there we go with those. Now the next bit I'm going to show you with respect to some modifications is some flush windows and modifications to the roofs of some of my coaches. Here we're looking at a Graham Farish suburban coach, which is pretty generic, but not, you know, it's pretty representative, I think, of the typical sort of pre-nationalisation suburban coach that you'd find on most of the railways. I think it probably resembles an LMS vehicle here. Now, I don't know whether you can tell, but I've actually put flush windows in that because the window set inside the coach was set way back from the actual window openings themselves. The second thing I've actually done with this is to grind down the tiny pimples that were on the roof, which were supposed to represent ventilators. Again, keeping costs down. These I'm guessing that they were moulded that way to minimise the cost to the final vehicle. So what I've did is just ground them down using a drill with a grinding tool on the end, smooth it off a little bit, and then these are white metal ventilators, and it gives a complete lift to the vehicle. So you know, that is an improvement. So taken with the flush windows and the roof, you get a much better looking profile of a typical suburban coach. The next vehicle we're looking at here is the Lima general utility van. This one obviously is in early BR colours, this one's in LMS. Got to give credit to Lima for producing a whole range of general utility vans and parcels vans. I think they did a great job doing that. The only drawback to them, as far as I was concerned, again, was the roofs, which had mere sort of like pimples representing the the ventilators on the roof. Again, they're ground down, and I've replaced them with these white metal torpedo vents, as they're called. And again, it just for me, it transforms the vehicle. It makes it much more representative, much more realistic. The ones on this vehicle are a tad smaller than on that one, but that's of no great misfortune or anything like that, because these things tended to vary anyway. The most important thing is that they are actually represented, and indeed there they are. I think that makes the vehicle look a lot better. Moving on, I'm going to try and go through this quickly. This is the old favourite, the Triang electrical multiple unit, with a Mark 1 design suburban coach on the sides, married to what looks like a 1930s Southern Railway design for the cab. But I always liked this set, and again it receives quite a significant improvement by the fitting of flush windows. The other things I've done, if you can notice there, is I've picked out the door handles in brass, used a matchstick for that, or a cocktail stick, and I've painted the sole bars. If I can get my finger there, painted those black, which again helps in the overall look of the vehicle. You haven't got that rather monotonous green covering the entire vehicle. Not that the green's monotonous, but the actual sort of having nothing sort of picked out gives it a very sort of mundane sort of look. Also, I've picked out a yellow warning panel and the cabling on the front of the loco there. This happens to be the back end, hence the lamp that I've put on. You can see I've put in a more conventional vacuum pipe, along with a screw coupling as well. I've also put on some more realistic buffers, and they're just on the end vehicles, the powered vehicles, and we're looking at the dummy one at the moment. But the coaches, again the same, flush windows, handles picked out, sole bars painted. I haven't done anything about trying to close the gap between the coaches. It's not a job I really I'd like to do. I would imagine it's quite involved, and I'm not really in for hacking about too much. But again, oops, we're looking on the powered end. If I can move along on my knees. So that's the powered end. That's got the actual motor in it. Same again. So that's on that. Quickly moving on, I'm going to look at, move those out of the way. I'm going to have a look at what I consider the finest model ever to come out of Triang Rovex, and this is scarcely believable. This came out in 1961, and it's the Manchester Sheffield Woodhead EM2 locomotive, and I have two here. One's in electric blue, note not BR 70s blue, this is electric blue, which BR decided to have for its electric locomotives back in the early 60s, and in the more usual Brunswick green here. Now with these locos I've again placed in flush windows, and I've painted the axle boxes yellow so that they stand out, and you can see that there. Painted the buffer beam red, and gone over the, well, I've actually painted a yellow warning panel on this and picked out the head code discs in white. Again, it just makes gives the locomotive some presence, and it helps it stand out. I'm not a great fan of diesel and electric locomotives. I do like them, but they're not my particular thing. But I think these two locomotives are absolutely splendid, and I am quite fond of them. The pantograph's a little masterpiece, I think. Again, particularly for a toy manufacturer in a ready-to-run model, which they have to market at a reasonable price. I don't know if you can see there's the flush windows on the front. It does make a difference. I have to say, putting in the side ones and on the cab are very, very fiddly. So there's the EM2. Again, I went over the yellow panel. I think there was yellow, I'm not sure, I can't remember, but I decided to put a yellow panel in and go over several times with the buffer beam red. Painted the shanks of the buffers silver, picked out the axle boxes. Again, these are small things which are readily doable and do give a lift to the locomotive. So that's on the flush windows. So what I'm going to do now is have a look at some of the other locomotives that I've got, just to illustrate a few more points. I'm just moving the EMU, the Triang EMU, out the way so we can get a look at the locomotives. Here is the Midland compound as modelled by Margate in about 1980-81. What I've done with this is, first off, you can see that the injector pipework has been picked out in copper and brass. That gives that a little bit of standout quality. And I've also painted the ram's bottom safety valve. I think that just came in maroon, and it is removable, and I painted the black and the brass on the top of that. As you can see, there is coal in the tender, very closely matched tender to the cab, which I like. I don't have a big problem with tender drive locomotives. I know it's controversial and most people don't like them in this hobby. To me, I'm not bothered one way or the other. Going to the front of the locomotive, you can see I've painted the buffer beam red. Also put in a screw coupling with the hook as well, and I've taken those dreadful, awful plastic buffers off and replaced them with metal buffers. Much sharper profile, and you can see the vacuum pipe there and the lamps. The other thing I did is I cut off the chimney, which in all truth it isn't too bad. They profiled it quite well, but the chimney has one of the most dramatic effects on the way a steam locomotive looks. So this is from one of the, this is white metal, and it's a Fowler Midland Railway chimney, and it's a much sharper profile. It has much more realistic proportions, and I think that just gives the locomotive a much more individual and realistic look. So picking out the bits of pipework, doing a buffer beam. I wanted to put some lining around it. I don't know how I did that, but I had a sheet of yellow lining, and I managed to get some on, and of course it's varnished over to keep it in place. Moving on, we've got the Hornby Margate schools. Similar sort of things here. The injector pipework under the cab has been picked out in copper, so that matches with the nice bit of copper piping they've got going around the firebox there. That's nicely done, so that picks that up. I also painted the cylinders and lined them out. I'm not sure whether that's historically accurate, but it improves the look of the locomotive. For me personally, the black cylinders just didn't seem to work. And on the front I've got the typical southern disc codes. Also a 3-link screw coupling has been put in. That's actually a Hornby one. The buffers on this particular model weren't so bad. They are Hornby, I think. So they, as far as I'm concerned, they could stay. I've also put in the brake pipe or the vacuum pipe there, and that sits on top of the buffer beam, not on it. And that's a feature of one cell locomotives from what I've seen. Moving on here, we've got the 9F, and again I've picked out a lot of the pipe work on here. So the exhaust steam injector under the cab is in copper, and the steam manifold pipe work which wraps around the top of the firebox is lagged. That was always lagged, and you can see that there's also some brass connections made on that. It's got the overhead warning flashes on it. It already came with that. The other thing I've done, I don't know whether you can quite see it on this, is I ground down the smoke box door handles, and they have been replaced by an etched one. So that's a proper smoke box door handle. You've got the pipe work, the exhaust, the vacuum pipe. Don't know if I can see the no, I think the screw couplings come off that anyway. This is quite a recent acquisition. This is Duchess of Gloucester. This is a 1990s Margate top and tender top, matched to a much later China chassis. The reason for this is the unique lining out of this locomotive. A few of these Pacifics came out when they decided to do them in the maroon livery. 2 Princesses and about half a dozen of the Duchesses came out with this BR style lining. Now it didn't last long, 12 to 18 months before they were reverted back to a pure LMS lining. So pictures are rare, and I think on Hornby this was the only one that they modelled it with. But as I didn't like the 1970s chassis, which was hopelessly out of scale and disproportionate, I married it to the later chassis, and it seems to work. Again, bright red buffer beam, and the front of that loco looks really good with the lamps, the vacuum pipe, screw coupling, and the shed code as well underneath the number plate or on the front. Also, the original Margate locomotive never came with footsteps. I had some spares, so they've been added. So, you know, apart from the skirt between the boiler and the footplate, this still looks pretty good. Moving quickly on, little Ivet, Bachmann Ivet wasn't bad, but the boiler mountings were very poorly represented. The chimney was all wrong. The dome isn't right, but I've not been able to find a dome anywhere from any of the detail providers. So that's come off, and that's a proper sized chimney. They did have these somewhat large looking chimneys, and it does improve the look of the locomotive. So that's, I've got the evidence to prove it. So if I'm just going up to a picture on the wall, there's the little Ivet 262 with that rather large looking chimney there. So there's the proof that that is actually the way they looked. So that rounds up the modifications and things I've made to the locomotives and some of the rolling stock. I hope you found that of some useful. Please leave me your comments down below. I'll answer any questions if I've not covered anything or you haven't understood anything. Thank you for watching.